I think what I'd rather do is, do you have any, you've got to talk to your group. And I would think that's more, just as valuable as talking to faculty. If after a few things have been said, so you got some questions in your own mind and get a little relaxed and talking to each other, a lot of issues come up, some things will be resolved. But part of the time it isn't whether they're resolved, it's whether you start to set some priorities. What do we need to start doing next or do first? So any Q&A or question answer? Yes.
I've got a question. Sometimes we inbred or Northeast where we've got these models that work in the state. Well, you see big agriculture in the Midwest. Is there some things like how are these thousands of acre crop farms or those 40,000 cow dairies? How are they transferred with some of these? Or are we just a smaller scale and how do they transfer those?
One of the things they do is there's two types. There's two. There's just one that just says family business. I mean, Black Gold is a family business. They're in 12 states. Simplot still is family. Coke Industries. Do you know who Coke is? It's now bigger than Cargill. There's David and Charles. Larry they bought out. Charles has no kids. He didn't get married at 50, or David did. He didn't get married at 56. Charles has 2. This isn't about to dilute down very fast. But a lot of them have almost gotten to the point. In fact, as I know, I'm on one advisory board where there is no heir. He's created an ESOP, and it will eventually own the company when it gets done. The governing board of the ESOP will be almost like a public company. Whoever the board of the ESOP is will be the governance of the company, and they will hire a CEO or one of the current employees. I think we're going to go more that way all the time. Some of these operations are simply getting big enough and there aren't logical heirs to it, or either they're heirs that might be good employees. But to go in from kind of early on to the CEO of something that's 6 states, like you have some corn and soybean farms out here too, but I worked with 2 corn and soybean farmers who each 70,000 acres of corn and soybeans. And Fair Oaks Dairy, I know them, but they come through the program, I don't know them personally. Riverview, which is about 55 or 60,000 cows, and then 3 or 4 states. But I think you're going to see more maybe sub-S, maybe L or an LLC, but a lot of small banks are sub-S corporations. I think you're going to have a formal board and a limited member ownership. And the ownership, for the most part, if there'll be a local market maker, the big part of the stock is to be sold back and forth between the existing ownership. We're going to see the big thing that's happening is a lot more specialization in management. And partially they're big enough because they spread their other overhead, piece of equipment or whatever else it is, that now they're building an overhead in management. Farm credit, anywhere else, when you were a little land bank or PCA and now you're Farm Credit Services America and a $15 or $20 billion 4-state operation, it changes. And you get that, not just chief operating officer, chief credit officer, CFO, IT director and stuff like that. You start getting specialization. We have a dairy team. We have a capital markets group, leasing company. You got an insurance company now that you have part of. There's going to be more of this looking at where the real business opportunities are. If we can hire the expertise and get into it and make money, there'll be more of that. One of these companies I'm on is looking at buying things outside of, it's still food related, so I guess not agriculture. One of the guys in North Dakota owns 15 John Deere dealerships, 3 banks, a couple of insurance companies. What else do they have? A grain company, 27,000 acres of farmland, and he says, if you understand a business model and you aren't so much ego that you have to run it all, that if you hire a good manager out of that industry that knows how to do it, and he reports and is accountable to the, in effect, holding company board, he said, I don't see there's any limit. Now, that may be more than what some of you want to do. It becomes, part of it's a belief system, a value system. I think farms ought to be smaller, closely held. I mean, that's our government right now. Most of the push is to help local business, small farm, and I don't have anything against that. I personally think, and I don't know if any of you even read DTN. I wrote an article somewhere 2-3 months ago about young farmers getting started. And in this environment, I think a young farmer would be better off to hook, as FarmLink does, to hook up with an existing farmer, maybe where you create an operating entity that he has ability to buy into, or profit sharing to buy into it, with some sort of lease. If he has land, he can lease it to the operating entity, or if he inherits it, he buys it a little. Or the other person that would eventually step back and maybe become a part-time laborer or mentor over a 5 or 10 year period. Usually those deals, if you're bringing in an outsider, and I don't know what New York's are, will be 3 to 5 years figuring out, is this the guy or is this a woman? And then there'll be at least 5 years or so transitioning into it. I can't imagine if you were starting from somebody outside them becoming CEO before they were, 50. They'd probably come in at 35 or 40. The guy that brings them in is probably around 60. I think you're going to see more of that. The other thing I think you're going to see a whole lot more is collaborative farming. And the reason is, for what I think of, not just a little. I really don't know. I know a lot of people in New York that are farmers, but what would be typical? If you took where I'm from, I'm in Texas now, but I'm a Central Illinois farmer. A 2,500 acre farm isn't big enough. You're not going to be around real long unless you grow some from there or leverage yourself out. So the idea of either true mergers, but a lot of people see the land as a wealth base they'd like to keep separately. They'll create this operating entity, and maybe 4 farms go together to create one 10,000 acre operation. If you look around the country, from wherever you are, what's a large farm doubles about every 10 years. I mean, when I was in high school, a big farm was a 604, a good, not huge, just a good sized farm. In 1960 it was 640, and in 1870 it was 1280, in 1980 it was 25, it's now 10,000 acres, is what you would call a big farm where I'm from. Not mega, but I think you'll see something similar. It'll be based on the size of where you are. And to get there, you can either level yourself up, or you can say, look, I need some specialized management skills, and I can get there quicker if we, share certain equipment. So each of us buying one piece of medium-sized equipment, or you can do it through a partnership arrangement like you're doing, getting bigger by internally capitalizing it. What do you think? That means that my way of life, or what is really farming, goes away? I don't think necessarily. I think most of these close-sale businesses, they run that way. They're locally marketed. I have no idea. 10, 20 years, I can kind of see I have no idea what 50, 100 years from now, 50 years from now, I don't have a clue what it's going to look like. But getting back to anything more specific to what we've been talking about, I think you really do need to go back, get your family, your management team together and figure out what's the vision for the farm, then share it with you. If they aren't the one developing it, then share it with your family. I think you've got to decide what ag's in this vision, what ag is going to look like in your mind 5 or 10 years out, as far as you think you can kind of see it. And your business will be shooting for that, and it'll continue to grow. This idea of putting a plan in place and we put it in the drawer is a big mistake. That horizon just keeps moving. It'll have hiccups and other things along the way, because of economy, new regs or whatever, tighter capital. But by and large, it just keeps moving forward. And operations it takes a manager, not just a good farmer, to be the leader and to coordinate several people with skill sets, as opposed to the guy that just was out there on the track. When I did a program for peer advisor groups, best management practices and alternative structures, about 8 years ago, for Gaylord in Texas. And one of the guys I brought in is a friend of mine, David Hughes, who's in Argentina with the ACRIA groups. And Wayne Richards was there, Rivers. And he said, now, you guys meet once a month. And there's several things about that. ACRIA groups are usually pulled from within 100 miles of each other. So they know each other. They can know who do they want to invite. They come in and sit in a few times where they're invited. They aren't as paranoid as U.S. producers are about somebody close by them, because they may be competing for rented land, my trade secrets or my personal secrets, we're not real interested in sharing. But he asked David, how are you able in the planting season, the harvest season, to go to a meeting? He said, in Argentina, farmers don't drive tractors. And what he meant, it's custom farmed. They hire people to do that. And so it's a little different model. But other businesses, some of them that are much bigger than farms, in Vistage, which used to be called TEC, the Executive Committee, and YPO, the Young Presidents Organization, you can't even be in that unless you have so many $1 million of gross sales a year. Those guys are meeting once a month. Again, a lot of them are mixed, different types of businesses. One of the things that always frustrated me being an ag economist and an extension economist is this notion I talked about the other day. From production, it makes perfect sense. But from a business management perspective, that if people don't come from my industry or from my part of the country, it's irrelevant. Those guys are going to be hired hands someday or employees of somebody else because they don't have the vision. And they aren't opening themselves up to things that are going to be changing their industry or other things. That's a bias. I don't intend to be pro-big farmer. A lot of the big farmers I know got that way, not because, as the coffee shop we talk about, they cheated somebody else. They got that way because they were darn good managers and because they saw the possibilities before it became obvious to everybody else. And I think consolidation, there's certain economies, and we make it worse. We speed it up because we don't prohibit technology developments. I mean, what we had as a combine when I was growing up, if you had 1,200 acres, you were going to run that thing into the ground. Our combines now handle at least 5,000 acres. And the communication technology, back and forth between employees, reading what's coming off a cow, if you got a rotary dairy, anything going into a computer and tracking individually. This one farm I'm on the board of raises peanuts. He's a set of potato farmer because he has to rotate potatoes. He can't grow potatoes every year, so he's got 30 or 40,000 acres of commodity crops. The salmonella scare in peanut butter, if you remember that, a peanut butter company that didn't have the problem. It came to him and said, "We cannot afford the public relations risk that would come if we had a salmonella problem. We'd have to be able to prove to the public that we trace it to its source, not just the farm, but the field, contained it and mitigated it within 24 hours. If we can't, the economy, the public relations is going to kill us." And this guy happened to have that capability. He never thought about raising peanuts before, but he does now, because he said, half my farmers in the southern half of the country, and peanuts work down there. He said, the only thing I don't want to do, I don't want to be part of any government program. And they said, don't worry, we'll take care of that. Okay, questions? I know I ramble up.
And you work with a lot of large farms.
Mm-hmm.
Have they gotten too big? Are they, we're going to have a low price of milk, 2015. Are some of the ones that fail going to be the big ones?
Some are going to be the big ones, but what will happen, more little ones will fail than big ones. You just won't hear about them. When a big one goes down, he's that Mike Stamp or Rick Rosentreter. Fortunately, I guess I can say neither one of those are ever in TPAP, but they grew for growth's sake. They were levered out the wazoo. And that's part of what was their downfall. So some of these big ones have been, just because the economy's been right, just been growing like crazy and bidding multiple year fixed cash rents that they've been getting at the top of the market. They're setting themselves up. It was fine as long as the market keeps going up, the moment it turns down. But a lot of the bigger farmers are bigger because they're better managers, or they have found out a way to manage a bunch of specialists and to develop a tier. You can develop so many tiers. A lot of government agencies and stuff get so many tiers of management. Most of the bigger ones try to become flatter. They may have specialists, but they don't want 6 layers of management in anymore. So some will go down. Most will be those, one or two things. Either picked exactly the wrong time, expanded just before a crash, like happened in 2008 with ethanol plants and dairies, or that had been just growing, well, we got to get bigger. So that means, they're almost, well, I can think of one of those two I mentioned, that was hated. He was a coffee shop talk at every town. And my little brother said what he was worried about, somebody's going to kill him. And, this guy would send checks to people and stuff like that to rent ground out from under him. I have a friend, Chris Dallas, that runs about a 70,000 acre operation, which is this small corn farm. And half the time he'd go in and just bid up, just for a second, got to bid up and then back off. Just, one of these days I'm going to watch this guy crash and burn because he's trying to rent everything that's out there. And I don't think he has the ability to keep doing what he's doing. He turned out he was right. But management's critical. Quality of people and management as you get bigger. And understand enough about your finance to maintain enough liquidity to to not be too leveraged. The sustainable rate of growth, if you look at if you have two or net worths, market value, net worth, as long as the market goes up, you can use that. But given the market doesn't always go up, if you take your rate of increase in your earned net worth, which is essentially ROE after withdrawals, the percentage that's increasing, once you get to the level of leverage that you're comfortable with on that side, you can grow at that rate. Because if you grow faster than that, you're going to leverage yourself up on the cost basis or the earned basis. Now, there's times when that market value is just going up like crazy. But if you're trying to set what level of leverage am I comfortable with and how fast can I be growing, that one, part of it you can go faster just by not consuming as much. One of the problems, Mo Russell, or reading anything he read. Okay, Mo says the big things that separate people, one, our machinery and equipment expenses per acre, one, our family living expenses per acre, and then there's land cost per acre. You'll find guys in my part of the country that one of them rents ground for 400 an acre and somebody else was exactly the same ground for 250. They're better negotiators, they have a better reputation, they aren't just trying to go out and get it. Is one thing. The machinery equipment part, you got a guy with 2,500 acres and a guy with 4,000, and labor. This one's using the same equipment and labor that 2,500 as 4,000 is. He's just using them more and using them more effectively. Family living is huge. If you start looking at different operations, and I don't know what your family living is, but let's say you've got an operation that's $5 million gross sales. Your net farm income is $500,000, and there are guys living on $250,000 of that. Other guys are living on just under $100,000. Well, if the trouble is, once you adjust your standard of living, if you have to cut back from that, it's not as easy. You've established everything, all the toys and all the cars and all the planes and boat, whatever's around the hunting lodges. Your kids are now going to certain quality schools, and cutting back is really tough on standard of living. But it's a big variable. I mean, from 100 to 150 or to 250,000. I know a guy who has an operation that grosses $150 million a year, and his salary is $180,000. Now he owns the ground, so he's getting more wealth than that. But running this company, he's taking $180 out of it for his salary. So, not that you should do that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this guy's really conscious of that. And just to your question, there are going to be some big ones that fail. I think you have to look at, unfortunately, you have to look at the reason behind the failure. Right now, if you don't have any liquidity, you're up. If you haven't been building, one thing you ought to do if you're in a good time, build your liquidity. That's the one time you have the surplus cash to do that. You don't go too far. I mean, and you don't, if debt's 15 or 18% interest rates, then you will pay some of that down. But where interest rates are now, it depends on what you use the liquidity ratio. I tend to look at net working capital to gross revenue as opposed to current asset ratio. I think a current asset ratio is a structural measure of liquidity because it looks at the balance sheet at one point in time, where net working capital with relative gross revenue gives you a little more of a flow base. The technical definition of liquidity is being able to generate sufficient cash to meet financial obligations as they become due without disrupting the ongoing operation of the business.